All right, so let's talk about the effects of the Industrial Revolution. So there's going to be a lot of effects. We're going to start off with the economic ones. So what are the economic effects? Well, for one, a lot of people are going to get mad that the traditional jobs that people have always done are now being replaced by low-skilled, low-paying factory jobs. And a famous example of this is a group of protesters called the Luddites. And the Luddites were upset that these machines were, forcing people to work in factories and get paid very little. So what they will do is they'll break into factories and destroy machines. Right? They get sledgehammers and just bash them and smash them. And they're quite popular. The workers were very supportive of the Luddites because they were, kind of taking it to the man or getting some type of revenge, right, for the abusive, poor working conditions. But the end result is that the Luddites themselves get captured. They will get put on trial, and they're going to get executed. Right? They're going to get hung. 14 of them. So this tells us that when it comes to conflicts between the workers' rights and labor, needs versus the property and the wealth of the factory owners, the government is going to support the business over the workers. So this is a lesson that workers are going to learn over and over, not only in Britain but in Europe and North America, wherever the industrialization revolution spread to. Now, I mentioned this before, is that we're going to see unskilled labor become the dominant work. So remember, you're not going to be working this, producing a gun, for example, or a rifle from beginning to end. Right? The rifle will be broken down into hundreds of pieces. All right, and your job is to connect one piece, one screw, one rivet, one whatever to that rifle, to that product. Your job is one of many. You don't produce everything from beginning to end. So again, you don't need to be educated, so anyone could work, including children and women. And this will allow for what eventually becomes known as the assembly line, right? Oh boy. The assembly line, right? Where the product is moved from, one area to another of the factory, and each worker just quickly and quietly puts one piece. Now, the most famous example of the assembly line is what we see in Henry Ford's factories. They were able to build automobiles, some of the first model of the cars, in 93 minutes, right? 8 times faster than when a group of people made the car from beginning to end. So the assembly line is going to increase the speed. You're going to increase the need for unskilled laborers, right? And this is going to result in mass production, right? Mass production means you produce things at such a fast rate and at such a minimum and cheap cost that the cost of the product is going to drop. Now you might say, oh my God, that's horrible. I can't sell my car for $20,000. Now I can sell it for $10,000. I'm going to lose money. And in a way you are, right? Because you're reducing the cost of the product. But on the other side, by reducing the cost, you're going to get more customers. More people are going to buy your stuff because it's cheaper to buy your stuff than other people's stuff. So the mass production, the assembly line, right? These two developments in the factory system are going to increase production and therefore reduce costs, and more people can buy more cool stuff. We also see the creation of corporations. Now, corporations have kind of sort of existed before in world history, right? Going back to the early modern era. But here we see the modern day version of corporations, right? And a corporation, again, is a company that owns businesses, multiple businesses, right? and or multiple factories, multiple industries. So a corporation, for example, might own a coal mine, a iron mine, a steel manufacturing factory, and might also produce railroad lines or steamships or whatever. So they own a little bit of everything, right? And they get involved in a little bit of everything. And these corporations are not privately owned, right? They're publicly owned, meaning that people can invest in them. And these investors, kind of like what we saw with the joint stock companies of the early modern era, corporations are going to sell stocks or shares. You can purchase them. If the corporation is successful, then you make a profit. If they're unsuccessful, then you lose your investment, but you don't go broke because you only invest a certain amount, unless you're stupid and invest everything. And corporations become a necessity because of the amount of money that is necessary to start up a factory. It requires tons of capital, tons of money. And unless you're a billionaire, chances are you're going to have to work with others to raise that capital to open up your factory or open up your business. So corporations become the main thing, the main form of business. We also see increasing use of monopolies, right? So monopolies is basically when one company controls the market, where there's no competition. So imagine I own all the steel factories, right? That means anyone who wants to buy steel to make skyscrapers or to make housing or to make steamships, they're gonna have to buy it from me, and I get to set the price because I control the market. I control the supply of the good, and therefore anyone who has demand has to meet my payment, right? Has to meet my cost. So monopolies become more and more common during this time. We're looking at the late 1800s, and therefore it is impossible for new businesses to come in, because if I want to open up a steel factory, but I can't because everyone is buying from the monopoly company, then I'm going to go out of business super fast. So monopolies control supply, they control price, they remove competition, and this is bad for the economy because a monopoly can abuse the customers, right? Take advantage of the consumers, and therefore people will lose money. Now, sometimes what happens is that instead of having one company control everything, you might have a cartel, which is multiple companies working together to control the markets. So the kind of an easy way for me to explain to you would be, if you live here in South Florida, you want to have internet access at home, chances are there's one or two companies that you can work with that will provide you this service, right? The internet service providers. So chances are it's either going to be Comcast or AT&T. Some of you might be lucky and have access to others, but for most people living in South Florida, those are your two choices. So if you want internet in South Florida, you have to buy from one of those two. So what do you think that's going to do to the price, right? Prices are going to stay high, much more expensive, because there's no competition. There's no one else to offer a better pricing model than what AT&T and Comcast offer. So we have a cartel of sorts here in South Florida. Now, governments, they're not going to do much when it comes to monopolies. Not until the early 1900s do we see governments really take steps to make sure that a company doesn't grow too big, too powerful, and develop a monopoly. All right, so that's it for this part. I will see you again when we talk about more effects of the Industrial Revolution.